Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you for braving the sweltering heat outside and the insufferable temperatures to seek shelter in this cool, windowless basement. I assure you, your trip here today will be well worth it. My name is Chris Woolforth. I'm the director of the Montgomery Fellows Program. It is my distinct honor to welcome you and to introduce our very special guest, Montgomery Fellow Johnny Clegg. For more than 30 years, the Montgomery Fellows Program has brought a wide variety of individuals to campus to enrich our community with their expertise and perspective. More than 200 fellows, in fact, have visited our campus, among them painters, poets and presidents, scientists and social activists, choreographers and cartoonists, jurists and journalists. While each has represented excellence in their different fields, they are united by their role as Montgomery Fellows, which showcases how they put their talent into play with lives of meaning and integrity. This spring, we have been fortunate to host 2 Montgomery Fellows. Both are anthropologists, but each has used their training to very different purposes. Their distinctiveness reminds us that what we major in college does not define us. Rather, and this is the hallmark of a liberal arts education, it gives us the tools to discipline us in our thinking while simultaneously liberating us to pursue our curiosity wherever it may take us. A few weeks ago, we heard from Daniel Potts, an archaeologist of the ancient Near East, who was with us all term teaching a course in anthropology. A scholar whose productivity and breadth of study makes all other scholars look like slackers. He draws on a full range of tools from a liberal arts education for his work, from the science of radiocarbon dating to fix objects in time, to the study of botany and determining what ancient peoples ate, to the comparative study of languages to gain multiple perspectives on historical events. All the disciplines are displayed in his research. His work helps us better understand the worldview of those who came before us and, by corollary, the uses and misuses of their history in the construction of contemporary worldviews. By contrast, today's presentation comes from an anthropologist of quite a different stripe. I could introduce Johnny Clegg to you by listing his awards, which are many for both his music and his social activism. They include over 5 million records sold, a knighthood in France, where he is known as the White Zulu, and even Dartmouth's highest honor, an honorary degree bestowed to him in 2012. But Clegg is first and foremost a storyteller. He tells stories through his music, he tells stories about his music and his performances, and he has had his story told by his Zulu age mates via the praise poems he has earned in his life. And so I will tell you just a part of a story about how Johnny Clegg came to live his particular life of meaning as a singer, songwriter, dancer, activist, and anthropologist. Born in England, Johnny Clegg grew up in Africa, living at various times in Zimbabwe and Zambia before settling in South Africa when he was 11. These moves exposed him at an early age to different cultures, and in particular to differing rules regarding race relations. As a teenager, he was drawn to the forbidden world of townships and workers' hostels by a passion for the street music and dance of the Zulu people segregated under apartheid to these restricted spaces. Risking arrest each time he snuck into these black-only spaces, a 15-year-old Clegg was a natural participant observer, a prototypical anthropologist. He learned Zulu, if only to better understand the often ribald lyrics he sung in imitation of his teachers, and his tenacity in the face of arrests earned him acceptance by the musicians and dancers he so admired. Clegg's pursuit of the music he loved, however, brought him in perpetual conflict with the cultural and spatial segregation of apartheid South Africa. He formed his first band, Juluka, with a close Zulu friend, playing primarily in private spaces, churches, homes, schools, where they could avoid the ban on multiracial integration that was integral to South African apartheid. Their music combined African and Western musical forms and languages and addressed social themes close to their understanding, the life of the Zulu migrant worker, and other aspects of the South African experience. At times, they pushed the boundaries of apartheid by playing public spaces, often being shut down by the security police. Their songs could not be played on state-run radio stations, but nevertheless, they gained a wide word-of-mouth following. Making a living as a musician is challenging enough, but being banned by the state-controlled radio stations and shut down whenever you play in public spaces adds a particular degree of difficulty. So Clegg went to school, studied political science and anthropology, and got a day job as an anthropology lecturer at the University of the Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, an experience that he later says gave him the language to make sense of his cross-cultural experiences and understand better his attraction to Zulu culture. Yet even here, he came into conflict with the deep segregation of the apartheid regime. Teaching anthropology in a whites-only institution brought with it many tensions, not least the contradiction between the intellectual liberation of education and segregation itself. With his first top 40 hit in the UK, Clegg took a sabbatical from teaching and has pursued his musical career ever since. It has been a career, however, that has never departed from the fusion of cultures that he himself represents, nor from the social issues that have shaped and continue to shape his work, his country, and his worldview. He has lived through a revolution, participated in that revolution, observed the revolution, and told the story of it. He has used the discipline and tools of his experiential and academic training as an anthropologist to pursue the Socratic ideal examined life, a life with meaning, and a narrative solely controlled by himself. His story is enthralling, entertaining, and best told by him. So please join me in welcoming singer, songwriter, dancer, social activist, anthropologist, and most of all, storyteller, Johnny Clegg.
It's 40 minutes. You'll tell me. Okay.
We'll cut you off.
All right, thank you. First of all, would you like a job as a PR agent? Hello, welcome everybody. This presentation is really it's not a linear presentation. I'm going to tell a number of different narratives at the same time. I'm going to ask you to bear with me. On the one hand, it's the story of how somebody becomes an activist. What is activism? On another level, it's a story of the search for an identity in a country where the politics of identity was supreme. What it was to be a white person, what it was to be a Zulu. These were all ideas and things which bubbled constantly in daily interaction in an apartheid environment. So, and then of course it's also about the journey to create a new music, a music that tried to offer an alternative to what was going on in the country. So I'm going to start really, I mean, my early childhood has been dealt with already. So I'm going to start really the moment that I stepped over the threshold into a new world. And it's when I met a street musician, a chap by the name of Charlie Mzila. And I was sent up to a store to buy some bread and milk for my mom. I was living with my mom. I grew up in basically a single parent family, and I had learned a bit of classical guitar, and I was very, very fond of Celtic folk music, Scottish and Irish folk music. Having been born in England and not knowing my biological father until I was 21, music was the way which I could connect to that part of my identity that I actually didn't have. So I had a kind of an English musical identity, which I subscribe to. I went up to the store and there was this chap playing a guitar, and I was quite shy. I was very small for 15. And I stood there holding my bread and my milk, and I watched him play, and I saw immediately that the guitar was tuned differently and there was a different picking style. And I just had like an epiphany, and I thought, this is a completely unique guitar genre. It's like, like a South African blues. And I'd really like to learn it. So shyly, I went up to him and I said, could you teach me? And he couldn't speak English that well. So it started off with gestures. You teach me guitar. And he said, okay. But I said, where do you work? And he said, across the road. He was a flat cleaner opposite the store. I said, I'll come to see you after school. And I came after school and I started getting my lessons. And it was a tough period for me because I had to sneak up to the roof where the workers in South Africa, all of your domestic workers had quarters on the top of these apartment blocks. And I had to sneak past the caretaker all the time. And there were a few moments where the caretaker wanted to call the police because I was, he was saying, what are you doing with the young white boy in your room? And as a youngster, I started to feel awkward because this behavior was being criminalized, either as, any time a black or a white person were meeting, it had to be for some nefarious purpose. Nobody could actually see an interaction. It was always a cloud of suspicion. And from that moment on, I was subjected to this kind of atmosphere all the time as a young person. Things carried on, and from the guitar, I was exposed to Zulu war dancing, and I really wanted to become a dancer. Zulu war dancing is a style of dancing whereby young men in the migrant labor hostels on the outskirts of Johannesburg, which were owned by the municipality, tribesmen would come into the city and they'd get a room, or they'd share a room with 20 other men with beds. It's like a dormitory. It's very Spartan, very military, open-plan toilets, open-plan kitchens, open-plan showers, male only, 3,000 men in these labor hostels, which fed the city its labor. And it was in these hostels and just around them, that the most amazing dancing and cultural activity would unfold over the weekends. Dance teams were created by the elders in order to keep young men connected to their culture, their society, and their rootedness in the tribal world. They were all told that you are only here, you are passing through, because you will marry a rural girl and you will have a rural home, and so we don't want you to be swallowed up by the city and fall in love with a city girl who's only just going to take your money. So dance teams were constructed to keep young men competing against each other in the stakes of masculinity, warrior values, and also just to keep them from being bored. And in this particular environment, these competitions that would happen on the weekend were either between teams or inside a particular team, individuals would challenge each other to upset the pecking order of who's the best dancer. And then obviously on the weekend, a letter would be written home about so-and-so who performed well in the dance team to his girlfriend or to his parents or whatever it is. So it was these kinds of very tenuous connections that were maintained through the migrant labor system in the hostels, and I became part of that. When I was also at the age of 15, I went into a hostel. I was snuck in by the dance team. The hostel was guarded by municipal police. We called them Black Jacks because they were always dressed in black cap, black uniform. And they would make sure that no woman went in and nobody from another race. So no Indians, coloreds, or white people could go into a hostel without permission from a magistrate. You had to get a permit to cross the racial line. The dance team came out. I went into the middle of the dance team, and then they sung me in through the gate. And we had this dance competition. And then they would sing me out, and I started to frequent the hostels, and eventually I was arrested and taken to my mother. I was standing between these two policemen. She opened the door, and they said, "Look, your son has been arrested for breaking the Group Areas Act. Basically, it's a statutory offence. He's too young to process as a criminal, but we're warning you that as he gets older, it's going to become far more complicated for him and for you. And secondly, he's going into a place which is wild. These are tribesmen. We are taking bodies out through feuds and tribal faction fights every weekend. It's a very dangerous place for a white man to be in." So my mother was very concerned. She was a cabaret singer and a jazz singer, so she understood passion for music. And she wanted to be Ella Fitzgerald. So I said, "Well, I want to be a war dancer, and you want to be Ella Fitzgerald. You get it." And she said, "I get it, but I don't have to go into a dangerous area to do this, and I need to have some sense that you're safe." So I spoke to the dance leader, and the dance leader came to our flat, and they sat down, they had a conversation, and she was happy with him, and I carried on dancing, carried on getting arrested. In the end, she said, "Listen, you carry your money to pay your fine. I'm not bailing you out anymore." And so politics found me. I don't think one becomes an activist. One is not born an activist. One is confronted by a set of circumstances. Activism comes when you see a fundamental injustice. You experience that injustice, and you try and process it. And the society that you're living in, if it's a totalitarian society like South Africa was, you don't have enough information or categories to understand. Now, I had grown up also 2 years in Zambia. It was a democratic black country. There were more black teachers, more black students than whites in Lusaka, where I went to for 2 years. So I'd already had an experience of a country with a different social system and political system. So when I came back to South Africa when I was 11, I was back into a whites-only school and a whites-only area. My sense as a young person was different countries have different ways of ordering things. And my initial sense, if I can give you an analogy, was apartheid put a fence across the road. An activist would say, "Why is there a fence in the road? This is crazy. Who put the fence here? I challenge this fence. I'm going to smash the fence down. It has no right to be across my path." The other way of looking at it, which is what I looked at it, was, wow, there's a fence in the road. How do you get over the fence? Is there a hole in the fence? No, there isn't. How can I climb over the fence? In other words, my solution was, at the age of 16, was to say, there's this obstacle. It's just a pothole in the road. I'm just going to find a way around it. I never questioned the fence. It took me about 4 years later, as I entered university and did politics, started to question the system itself and to understand how it operated and why I was unable to find a different angle on what I was experiencing. I was also going through all sorts of adolescent issues about masculinity, and I was a young person, and what would happen is South Africa had a system of social engineering, of controlling the movement of black people through what they called a pass. A pass was an identity document. In that identity document, your employer was registered, you as an employee were identified as coming from a rural area, particular rural area, and it would also state how long you've been employed, whether you've been back home or not. So freedom of movement was completely absent in South Africa in the apartheid period. And what this did is it made black people foreigners in their own country. So you could not move from one part of South Africa to another as a black person without your passbook. If you didn't have it on you, you were arrested and you went to jail for 3 months. If you were moving to look for a job, you had 72 hours, 3 days. It was called the 72-hour pass to find a job or to find a job offer. When you got the job offer, you had to go back home. You had to go to a labor bureau. The labor bureau would then stamp you to give you permission to go and get. It was a mind-boggling enterprise. It was also a catch-22 because in order to get a job, you had to get to Johannesburg. But you couldn't be in Johannesburg legally for more than 72 hours. And if you got a job offer, which meant that you had to be there for 80 hours, you were technically illegal and you could go to jail for 3 months. And your behavior is criminalized. You become a criminal. You have a criminal record. So we lived on the ground floor in a three apartment block in Yeoville. And it would happen every 3 weeks, every month. I'd get a tap at the window, tock, 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 tock. And there'd be either Charlie or some other chap that was part of the dance team. Yes, so-and-so's been arrested. We need money to bail him out for his pass. So I'd wake up and my mom, I'd say, Mom, we need to give. So my mom would give me some money and then we'd go and I'd give it to the chap. And this experience for me, initially, I was watching the system from a bit of a distance. But as it happened more and more and more, politics found me. I never got involved in what I was doing because I had an idea that I wanted to change South Africa or I wanted to change the political system. It was an experiential thing, a gradual thing, to the point at which Sipho and I were sitting in my little Beetle, talking in the main road in Yeoville. The police stopped behind us, they got us, they searched us. They opened the car, they opened the boot, they searched him, and they made him show his pass. And this moment was one of the moments that angered me and made me feel that, why are we being criminalized just sitting here talking as buddies? What do they expect to find? What do they expect to discover here? And they were looking for drugs, they were looking for guns, they were looking for... Because in South Africa at this time, in the white... in the conventional wisdom of white society, a black and a white sitting together at night after 10 o'clock in a car meant there was something wrong. So after many, many, many of these incidents, and when I went into university, I became more active. And so my life split. On the one hand, I was running with my obsession with dance and finding this new way of creating a conversation between African language and English, African melody and folk rock, Irish Celtic folk music, African rhythms and modern Western rhythms, whether it was reggae or rock or dance, and getting a conversation going. And then, of course, not only doing that, but taking from Zulu philosophy, metaphor, sayings, idiomatic expressions, proverbs, using those as a platform to write songs from. Because as a songwriter or as a writer, one always writes from an angle to find a good angle. And, I would be be with some migrant workers, and they would say, so and so fell asleep, and somebody pickpocketed him and took his entire pay, and everybody would laugh. And I thought, gee, that's weird. And I'd say, why are you laughing? And then they'd say, "Huchani obulele buvuswa mlilo." The old dry grass that's crispy, it's so dry, is renewed when you set it on fire. Because slowly then suddenly green comes up and you have a new. And that's a beautiful way of saying that this guy was asleep. He trusted his environment and somebody stole his stuff. He was like dry grass. And this was the fire. So he's going to learn his lesson. And he's going to be new. And he will never do that again. So it was a beautiful... and Zulu language and culture is replete with hundreds of these observations. And it's also a way in which they soften the blow for him, because they're saying to him, this has made you new. You are a new person by this experience. It is a hidden gift. Vuga, wake up. So I took that and I wrote a song around that idea. And I've used hundreds of those as part of. So what I was bringing in also is traditional wisdom, traditional worldview, filtering through my music into a song which would have maybe English lyrics, and then the chorus would have this line, and I translated. So I was busy with this project, and that project, just simply cultural mixing, became a political statement. I didn't intend it to be that. I just wanted to create a conversation. So my intention was an artistic one, but it was inherently political in a country that had cultural segregation as law. Okay, let's just talk quickly. There's a little framework. What have I got? 20 minutes? Okay. Just a framework to... so apartheid was a streaming system. You were born, and from the moment you were born, you were registered. The main pillar of apartheid started with the Population Registration Act. And this act demanded that any child born would be streamed into 4 races, either one of those 4 races, white, black, colored, or Indian. And once you were streamed, your life was over. You were in that category of race, and where you went to school, where you lived, what job opportunities, what education, what health facilities, all of that was predetermined by that streaming. So when you talk about a totalitarian society, South Africa totalized your life. The park bench you sat on, the entrance or exit to a public building, whites, non-whites, European, non-European, the bus that you got on, the train that you traveled on to work, the store, entrance and exit that you could go get your lunch from. All of these things were determined by your streaming from the day you were born. So your identity document was your life. And it was in your identity document that your rights were conferred as a member of a group, a biological group, a race. So the logic of this was, okay, so if we're going to stream people in their races, we have to have laws that force them to be separate. So they had the Group Areas Act. Every race group had its own space, its own geographical space. And no other group could go in there, or individual could go in there without permission, unless it was economic activity, and it was clearly economic activity. Then, in order to reinforce that spatial separation, they introduced the Cultural Amenities Act. So all the amenities, the cultural amenities that you had access to, the hall, the swimming pool, the gym, the basketball court, whatever it is, that was also, if it's in the group area, no other race group could use that facility. So if you're an integrated group, an integrated soccer team, an integrated band, you couldn't operate. It made it impossible for you to operate. So we, as a band, we started to have to deal with this, and we discovered that a lot of these rules were specifically made for public spaces. So you could find private spaces, if you could operate. And so we started doing that. We found schools, churches, university halls, which were owned by the university. We played in a lot of consulates, embassies, French, Spanish, English, USA. They would have evenings where these multicultural gatherings, which would really upset the South African government, because this was a kind of a direct flouting of the racial code. So while this was going on, I was a student and I took politics and anthropology, and I became involved as an activist in the emerging trade union movement. And I joined the Industrial Aid Society as a translator, because I had taught myself Zulu, and I was translating into Zulu our information to the workers about their rights, workers' rights. One of the things also about being an activist, I think, is you are basically submitting to an idea that is bigger than you. You are following. You've got to have an ideology. You've got to have an idea of where you're going. Why are you doing what you're doing? So part of our activist program was, we were exposed to various models of how different societies can operate, what rights, what freedoms, what they could deliver, how we could deliver them, where we should focus on. And labor unions, up until about 1976, I think, were illegal. They had these worker bargaining councils, which were completely compromised because they had to go through a certain bottleneck and deal with certain kinds of ways of bargaining. Strikes were not allowed. Militancy was not allowed. And so what we did is in this particular part of 3 or 4 years that I was involved in this incipient trade union initiative, was we had a burial society, and the burial society was really a front for a worker conscientization program. And so we would have these meetings, and we would talk about the benefits of the burial society, and then we'd launch into the labor theory of value and a very hardcore, maybe Marxist or socialist interpretation of how labor creates value, and how do we determine what their labor power is worth in the marketplace, and how to organize around it, etc. Later on, I became involved in the Wages Commission, which was an initiative to find how the government had induced international companies to go to the decentralized areas of the homelands in order to develop them and to be able to pay below poverty datum line wages. And they do two things. They were achieving two things here. They were getting legitimacy for the homelands, and they were giving the companies a profit incentive to do this. So what we did is we went around and we collected all the slips, all the wage slips. And on a particular day, I arrived in with my colleague, and we had a preacher, a black preacher, and he had got access to Leyland, the big truck company, and we had like 300 or 400 slips, and then a few hundred from another. So we had a bunch of these slips, and we were arrested by the security police. We were held at the Petersburg and interrogated. And later we were charged, and we had to come back, and we had to plead guilty and pay a fine, get a record, and they made it pretty tough for us. The thing for me really was, as I was involved in this side of it, that is in the hardcore, hard-nosed, tough political arena. I was also involved in the softer cultural activism. And I had to make a decision in the end. I had to say, well, what do I want to do? And I said, I'm an artist, I'm a musician. I want to. So I left that side of the trade union side, and I went into cultural activism. Doing my music at the same time, being an anthropologist, and trying to work out what is the correct position in pursuing my career as a person who's critically reflecting on the society that they're in. So there were very interesting debates, which we were involved in, which were really around how do you serve a greater cause which has got very, very clear, defined, objective ends, at the same time keep your independence as an artist, your creative independence. You know, I don't want to write about a strike. I don't want to write about the fact that 4 people were shot dead in Mdantsane. I don't want to write about unemployment. I don't want to write about these issues. I want to write about a situation where migrant workers come to the city and they build these amazing things and then they go away and they can't share in it. I find that a bit more ironic as an artist. That's the kind of thing I want to write about. I can say the same thing, but I don't have to hit you on the head with it. And I don't want to become a propagandist for any ideology. You can be a progressive, radical, and a revolutionary artist without joining a political party. These debates were fraught with very, intense debates. And at times I was isolated. I was made to feel that I was a crypto-tribalist, or I was on my own path and not really fitting into the collective wave of sentiment to overthrow apartheid. So one had to be, if one was convinced about what you were doing, you had to be very committed to that position. And so what would happen is the movement would flow over you and you would intersect, and you had to keep a certain amount of independence and not be used for an issue. The thing about an issue is that an issue dies. You can't, if you write about an issue, they solve it, the song's no longer relevant. The poem is no longer relevant unless you've universalized it. So issue-based music or issue-based poetry or issue-based sculptures are they can't talk across time unless they are presented cleverly. You know, Goya's painting, that's an issue, but it's done in such a way that you see it and you think over the centuries, wow, what was going on there? And you sucked in. So it's a technique. So if you're going to write about politics and you want to be an activist, you have to do it in a way that enables people to have an entry point, an angle, a sense of some emotional contradiction or paradox or darkness or humorous thing that twists it and gives it, so that when you're into the work, you discover that landscape that's hidden there inside. You think, oh, okay, this is about this and that and whatever. But it's actually quite nice. It's actually, it gives you a sense of, I can interact with this without feeling under pressure or being judged or being forcefully conscripted into a position. That is the key to successful, for me, writing activism. Because what it does is it takes a human situation and makes it accessible without you having to go through the mediation of a Marxist, socialist, liberal capitalist, or whatever it is, position that is being presented. And for me, that was a great struggle because there was a bunch of us. Sometimes it was called, sort of bourgeois idealism, or, sort of destructive, selfish, artistic, self-aggrandizement. You are open to all. You had to be tough. You had to have a thick skin to survive a daily onslaught of this, because it was a very intense time. It's hard when you are debating and people say, yeah, but what do you do? And they've just shot dead 3 people, and that's the world we're living in, dude. What are you writing about flowers and the daffodils for? So we had a whole issue about relevance. How relevant is what you're writing? What are you writing about? Why are you writing about daffodils? Why? So we had these amazing arguments where people would be saying, well, if I'm going to write about daffodils, I've got to write about it in a way that says that the beauty of a daffodil and the way it is in its color and form and symmetry is being denied me because I am oppressed. You understand? You've got to find your angle. I wish I could have access to this daffodil, but I can't, because I live in a township where there's no flower, no tree, no grass, no nothing. So I can write about daffodils if I want to. But I use the daffodil and its beauty and its symmetry to highlight just its absence. So, but it's also saying, I'm human. I can appreciate a daffodil. I may live in a township, and I may live under a oppressed condition, but I have a part of me that wants the daffodil. So all of those significances, you can tweak, you can operate, but it takes effort as a writer. So a lot of songs that I wrote took sometimes months. I would go back and tweak and look at them and find different ways to, and most of the serious, critically effective poets, writers, artists, choreographers, they developed a language. They had their own grammar. You could go and they kept the mine was wholeness, completeness. A lot of my songs are about, I come from a world that is fragmented, a world that is divided, a world that is separated by force. How nice would it be to be whole? Wholeness. So a song like Dela, a song like Bombs Away, a song like Two Humans on the Run. All of these songs were about when will we be whole? How can we close the circle? Because that's what we wanted. And that's what democracy in South Africa meant for us. It meant that we would be one. It meant that there would be one space for everybody. Not because you're a member of a group or a culture or a language, but because you had rights as an individual with the Constitution. You don't have to talk to me anymore about Zulu or English or Indian or Afrikaans or whatever it is, black or white. I have my rights, just like you, and they're equal, and we have power. So that was the promise of the new South Africa. So coming from that period, and then you must understand that the struggle, you are writing stuff, and you are singing, and you are playing, and you are presenting an alternative to what is going on at the moment. You have black and white on stage. You have the languages being mixed. You have African metaphor, idioms, worldview being used to construct songs. You have black and white guys dancing on stage, doing Zulu war dancing, which is a complete anathema to what the apartheid's view was about what we were doing. But on the other side, you had the execution of activists. You had the most bloody, hidden I can only think of Chile and Argentina during those terrible times where, hundreds of young people disappeared. And we wrote songs about it. We tried to say, we can see that reality as writers. We want to sing about it. But you always had to find an angle that didn't say, they are missing because you don't boycott South Africa. They are missing because you are guilty of allowing this thing to continue. So, as a writer and as a storyteller, the key for me was always to find a metaphor, an idea, an image, a set of clues to make the song attractive through a nice melody, but also to suck somebody in to say, that's interesting. And as they went in, it unfolded. And they said, oh, this is about somebody who's gone missing. Oh, and he's banging on the door, and this is happening. And they can't find this person. And the Zulu says, Uzo Gijima, you can run, but you can't hide. We will find you. And when we find you, you will disappear. Wow, that's quite intense. I wonder what this is about. That's what you want to do. Because it leaves that person with a question mark. And when you have a question, you want to find an answer. It makes you curious. And then you step in. You step in. I haven't dragged you in by kicking and screaming and saying, you guilty bugger. That's a key. And for me, the discovery of that, and the discovery that other artists had to find their own solution, either in sculpting, in film. We had a very, very well-developed theatre, political theatre in South Africa. They developed their own theatrical styles and languages to deal with these issues. And in a crazy way, I was shaped, and I was fortunate to be shaped by those pressures. It was a pressure cooker, and made even more difficult because when we went overseas and we got the distance to see our country and to see how people lived and behaved to one another here, it actually amplified for us, the urgency of having to do something. So activism and art, anthropology and political detention, these things found their way in my life to kind of make a weird existential puzzle, and I put it together as I went along. There is no map, there is no formula, and everybody has to find their own way. And in the final instance, I had to experience criticism from the left and from the right and from the center. I remember a very good colleague of mine, Charles van Onselen, saying, why don't you just take a socialist position and then you'll only be hit by one side all the time, instead of being hit from both sides, And as an artist, you have to basically be hit from both sides because you are occupying an independent space. Because you are an artist, you want to be a free thinker. You want to have the freedom to construct something which is meaningful, which has good form, which is good quality, which has got something of value to offer, and also enables you, and I want to come back now to identity, which enables you to define who you are. Art is really about the artist trying to work out who the hell he is in the end. And all he's doing is he's offering you an insight into that internal struggle. He's saying, I went through my blue phase, I'm going through so I'm trying to work out how to externalize what I'm feeling about what's going on now. And, so from extreme formalism to really hardcore content where you can see, people were thrown off the 10th floor of the John Vorster Police headquarters after they were interrogated. They were thrown off, and a number of them were killed like this by the security police. And so there was an art exhibition of falling bodies. I mean, it was incredible. Paper mache falling bodies in different positions, which was talking to that directly. No formalism. So you had from that extreme expression to other colors. And there were very famous artist in South Africa, Norman Catherine, whose art you see on my T-shirt. This craziness where the hand turns into a dog biting the head of the owner. Those kinds of really dark, funny, extreme interactions using the human body, two heads coming out here. This idea of the social body, the political body, having these incredibly warped relationships with itself. That became his mainstay, and he still does. He looks at, he still uses this format, but it refers to a much earlier period in the struggle in South Africa to understand what is our political body. How as an artist, I'm going to use the physical body to look at the political body, and I'm going to make all these crazy statements about it. And some of them were very funny, because I must tell you, apartheid at times was hysterical. The logic was just crazy. So I'd just like to end by saying that identity, we were told that we were white English. We are white Afrikaans. You are black Zulu. You are black Venda. You are black Shangaan. You are black Tswana. You are black Sotho. You are black Pedi. And those two cultural and racial categories are what you are. You know why you are that? Because it's the only way that you can have access to any power, any representation. So the struggle for identity is a huge struggle now in South Africa, because we are now a single country. Everybody has the same rights, but we still have to deal with the legacy of that time, which is filtered in to South Africa. And what the government did is instead of having 4 provinces, they divided it up into 9 separate areas, just to kind of break down geographically what the old South Africa was doing to us. And we are now the 20th year of our democracy. We have lots of issues and problems of developing political systems, as in the rest of the world. But as a South African, I've been through the turmoil, the change. I lost many friends. My colleague David Webster was assassinated, shot dead outside his house in 1989. Really just months before Nelson Mandela was released. He was a social anthropologist, a senior lecturer in the Department of Social Anthropology. Many of my teammates in the hostels were press-ganged into violent Zulu nationalist attacks on the ANC and the UDF, and counter-attacks by the ANC and the UDF on the Zulus. It was a time of incredible upheaval, and I found myself caught in the middle, because I was part of the tribal community who were being conscripted into a very narrow nationalist position. And in the end, I was told, don't come near the hostels. So I was flapping in the wind, and I had to examine myself and say, well, what do I do here? And I kept on having conversations with people, and essentially, it had to actually fight its way out. And eventually in 1994, it settled, but not until over 4 years. Thousands of people were killed, murdered, attacked, homes destroyed, whole communities running away, leaving settlements, joining, another group you'd find like an enclave of Zulu nationalists inside a big UDF area. And in the end, they would just move right out to go to another area because they were going to be subject to an attack or whatever. So it was a very, very rough and violent time. And eventually, through a miracle of dialogue and discourse, we managed to get a negotiated settlement. My partner, friend, and brother, Sipho Mchunu, when I discussed this with him, I said, "How do you think we did this? We had the worst racial build-up. This was going to be like Yugoslavia. This was going to be like Bosnia. We're going to see this split. The Zulus wanted to have their separate state. There was a whole thing going. All the homelands wanted to be independent from the rest of South. There was all of these secessionist movements going on. And then there was the white racists who wanted a white homeland. And then there was the ANC who said no." One human, one vote in a unitary state, which is this one of the songs I wrote, which was for me totally clear. That's where we had to be, which is where we are. So I said to Sipho, "How do you think we managed to do this?" And he said, now he's a tribal Zulu. You grow up fighting your best friend, stick fighting, and each district, young boys fight each other and they get a pecking order. Then as they get older, so you go through a fixed, it's like you're born a umfana, you're a boy, then you're an ingwele, a senior boy, then you're an ipungu, you're a young warrior, then you're an insizwa, you're a full warrior, and then you have to become umnumzana, which is the head of a homestead, and then you become a kehla, a senior, and then you become iteku, which is a living ancestor. So you're as a male, you go through this system, and up until the fourth level, it's physical violence. You are asserting your warrior identity as a man who can handle himself in a fight, and if the district has to defend itself against an attack, you are a dependable citizen of that district. So I said to Sipho, how do you interpret the transformation? And he said, "We managed to talk our way out of it because," he said, "siyazana." Now, that means literally because we know each other. And it is a very dark window. When you oppress somebody, you oppress your own humanity and you oppress their humanity. It's a very intimate relationship. There's something so deeply connected in that oppressive moment. That knowing, that kind of knowing. There's also the knowing of one community conquering another community. In the history of South Africa, the Zulus conquered the tribes around them. The Boers fought against the Zulu fought against the English fought against the Boers. Everybody had to go at everybody. In the darkest way, we know each other through violence. And the 4-year interregnum, 1990 to 1994, where the old order wouldn't die, so the new order couldn't be born, in that 4 years, there was violence, huge violence. And he said to me, because of that and because of the history of our interaction with each other, because we oppressed each other, we knew each other in the darkest way. When it came to the final countdown, we looked across the table and we realized that the only way now is to go forward as one people. And he said, every little negotiated moment was, things were extracted, things were exchanged. And he said, nobody outside of South Africa will really understand that. Only we can understand that. And in a deep sense, when it comes to foreign relations, one has to understand that, maybe the Syrians have to have that discourse. Maybe they have to go through that. Maybe they have to go through nation building. Maybe they have to go through what's going on in Libya. Maybe they have to go through that because they haven't done that yet. So, these are very deep questions. And in our society, we look 10 years down the line, we are not entirely certain that our project is going to be able to be maintained in the way that we envisage it. And so, as an activist, you keep your eye on that. And so, in some of my last songs, I've been looking at those kinds of issues of black economic empowerment, which in a way limits young white males from getting a job, because the government will never employ a white young male. So that's one area that you're out of. Then you have companies, big companies, who have to also enforce black economic empowerment, which means these big companies are not going to employ white young males who are qualified. They will employ a black person more qualified or qualified in order to meet the quota system of black economic empowerment if they want to get tenders from the government. So young white males now are in a predicament. They were born into a new South Africa, which is saying, sorry, you just have to wait a minute. We're just going to rectify the legacy of economic access to the good stuff. So, you know, you might have to be a lost generation. So they are leaving and going to England when they graduate to go. So we're losing a certain amount of expertise. So it's these kinds of weird ironies and contradictions that are now floating through our society, which we're looking at. So I wrote a song about it. It's hard, it's so easy to be against something. Everybody was against apartheid. You know, it's hard to be for something that has not been shaped or formed and is in the middle of being formed. And so one has to be kind of, in a way, you can be critically reflective, but you've also got to say, okay, you know, I do stand for a unitary state. I do stand for one human, one vote. I do stand for a non-racial, non-sexist, democratic country. I do stand for the Constitution. I have to fight for that. So I'm not a propagandist. Okay, it's not propaganda. That is something that I stand for in a general sense, and where I see that's going wrong, I'm going to make a statement or, you know, get involved or whatever it is. So my identity has been shaped by that. This idea that we know each other in the darkest way. All of those things go up to make South African identity. And when we look forward to seeing ourselves as citizens sharing a common space, our cultures are different. We have a diversity, but there are moments where I can see that black and white and colored and Indian, we know each other, we know each other's cultures, each language, we know each other's body movements. We know, you know, it's like suddenly there is a sense of a general acceptance of everybody's warts and shortcomings and lack of insight. We have to start there. And as an artist now, operating in that environment, it's a completely different story. It's a completely different world. And it's harder. It's harder because if you're fighting against something that exists, you have a real concrete enemy, and you can analyze them into a coma. But if you've got just a dream, and you've got a frail line here, and quite a strong pillar here, and half a wall here, and you're saying, yeah, but just hang on, because we just got to build that wall. That is a different attitude. And that you have to be stronger, you have to be tougher, and you have to be more resilient. And while you're doing that, you're watching your own people, some of them, undermining that. You know, so it's a far more different game now as an activist. And so, just closing now, you know, I was going to try and cleverly weave a narrative of music in, but I'm sorry I failed to do that. I'd like to just close up now and say thank you for coming. I hope you've got some sense of this story, and that my music is embedded in the entire trajectory of South Africa from the time I started recording. A lot of my music is in fact a record of those events, devilishly and cleverly concealed.
Thank you for that very clever and devilishly constructed narrative of your life, Johnny. We intended this as a conversation, so there is an opportunity to ask questions. There may also even be an opportunity to ask Johnny to take advantage of the guitar that's sitting up front. I would ask, if you have a question, that you wait until the microphone comes to you so that Your brilliant question can be recorded on the transcript of today's program. John, do you want to identify the first question? Do you want to point to people?
Oh, no, I'm fine, whatever. Yeah, that's cool.
Thank you very much. This has to do with the tunings that you heard.
Yes,
I'd
okay.
like to know what those are,
Oh,
if you could
okay.
describe them or
All right, well,
play.
basically, the guitar, the concertina, the violin were Western instruments which were Africanized by a group of people. Amongst the Zulu, they were called the Amachaca, but there were also other tribes, the Shangaan, also developed a very, very unique guitar style. The Sotho people developed, the southern Sotho in Lesotho, they developed the most remarkable use of the accordion. And these instruments were taken and they were converted to suit the needs of indigenous music. The guitar, the Zulu tuning is just, it's in Zulu tuning. So, this would be normal tuning. This bottom E is brought down to a D. So you've got a resonant, and the G shape was the main shape in which songs were written. Kind of thing, and the repertoire of music was really initially they took lock, stock, and barrel traditional songs that pre-existed as songs, little nursery rhymes that you would sing to your daughter in the hut, and they would put it adapted onto the guitar. There are many of those songs, and war songs, which are national war songs, which were put onto the guitar. And then there were the proper troubadours. They were writing songs. They were describing the experience of the migrants in the city, the past laws, the issues that they faced. Some of them were very funny because migrants have a biting humor. They're at the bottom of the pile. Nobody likes them. The city folk don't like them because migrants will work for less. So they'll come in and undercut you because they're more desperate. So there was always this tension between rural and urban, and it was manipulated by the government all the time. So these troubadours would write songs about all sorts of things that migrants saw and experienced in the city. He has a song. It's a guy walking down the road, and he's saying, with a biting humor, "Sugen leleni, get out the way. Ayeza makwela kwela. The kwela kwela are coming." Now the kwela means to jump up. Kwela, you jump up. So when you were arrested, there was a very big police van, and you were told to kwela pagati, to jump inside. So he was saying, get off the road, the kwela is coming. You're going to have to kwela. But kwela is also a musical style of the 50s. The penny whistle. Yeah, that's kwela music. So here's an example of it. Usuka endleleni ayeza makwela kwela. Usuka endleleni ayeza makwela kwela. Usuka endleleni bafo ayeza makwela kwela. Usuka endleleni. Usuka endleleni ayeza makwela kwela. Ayeza makwela kwela. Ayeza makwela kwela. Suka endleleni baba ayeza makwela kwela. And so on. And there was a format that they developed. You perform, when you performed, you had to start with an introduction. You had to play your music, and then you had to say your praise poem. The names given to you by your age mates, little incidents that happen in your life, which are your biography. And they're also very funny. There's some really famous ones of great guitarists. I'm just trying to think of, So what you would do? Okay, you would. I'm going to play a walking song now. A walking song is a rhythm of cycle and music, which is very repetitive, but you're walking with it, and so you're going. So you'd sing your song, and then you'd praise yourself. Skate shobeni wamuthi umuntu uphekela. Skate namamo isinto kuzehle kabe ngoba zehle ngolisi kudlala khala phala wema hostel. Bakuzonda belungu, bakuzonda flatini, bakuzonda ekhilani abafuna umlungu udla futhi nabantu bakhe. Tata wabaleka noCheckers. And you carry on singing. Okay, so you identify yourself, and there's a section of my praise poem. But there's some very funny ones. Islima esalala nesini islima kwaze kwandu blima emhlabeni. The idiot that slept with another idiot. And so idiocy became huge in the world. So that's a praise line. There's a praise line of a famous guitarist. So these are all angles. These are all very clever, very bright, very witty moments in a song, which will win the performer a preferential choice by the audience. And so these are highly competitive, this. It's just like Zulu war dancing. You want to get up on the pecking order of street guitar music. You have to perform, and on the weekends you'd go to a hostel, and there'd be different guitarists competing against each other. And normally, either in a song about maybe what I've just mentioned, or in their praise poem, they'd have something hysterical, really funny, they would take rural metaphors and bring them into the city. Like, traffic policemen would be herding, metal cows, whatever it is. They run with it, and they make it hysterical, and that would be part of your creative presentation. So praise poetry is very important. It's in most things. Even in dancing, you have a praise name that you dance with. And so the guitar became this place where people could express themselves, make statements about their life as migrants, and a whole repertoire of songs. Now, for me, one of the things that gave me a great, an entry point, is that a lot of war songs were in a 6/8, which is like a Scottish reel. Celtic folk music. So you would sing, Esabenganon, ubalekela, watutela, wesabo watumuayo, watul, watutela, wesabenganon, it's you've got that Celtic beat, and so you have here it is. Wesabu kutumoyo la shona. Wesabenga no nubalegela. Wesabu kutumoyo. Wesabenga no nema watutela. Wesabu kutumoyo. Watutela wesabenga no. dun, 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 dun. So I heard that. And I said, this is Celtic folk music. So that was my first entry point, finding Western folk music to talk to Zulu street guitar, and became a kind of the first rough, raw template for getting the music of what became Juluka and later Savuka, getting those conversations going. So there were meeting points, and one had to identify them, and concertina as well. The concertina, the keys of the concertina in the minor mode, I mean, you close your eyes, you think you're in Dublin. You know, I could hear that because I'd been so in a way, I was prepared because I could recognize the echoes of the two traditions. And it was also helped along because the British defeated the Zulu, and the Zulu respected that in a way. So they took a lot of British military culture, the kilt, which we call iketi, which is a skirt. So iketi, you wrap your traditional cloth around your loins, and then you put this Scottish tartan skirt that you tie on here, and you have a big military bass drum instead of a traditional drum. It's a military bass drum, kutung, 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 and you have military rituals. You're all in a line, and you have your sticks like this, and you've got a guy in front of you, and you're all moving like this. It's like a big snake, but these sticks actually are weapons, and then sometimes you'll put them here like a gun, and you do this movement. Okay, and you have a bugle. You'll have a military bugle sometimes operating in the background, and the idea of military drill really appealed to the Zulu when they saw military marching. That idea was taken, adapted, and again reconfigured and put into the dance mode. So that team dancing, team movements, joint, socially cohesive presentation of military force became critically important. So all of that was like resonating for me as a young person. I'm going, why are they wearing a bass drum? Why is he wearing? And they call it iskoichi from Scottish. Iket iskoichi. So I thought that's bizarre. Why? And when you went into these crossover people, the Amakatla, not traditional and not urban, but in the third way, they had a tea drinking ritual. And normally you get into a hut, you sit down, you get a goat skin, you sit on the floor. But then when the tea came, there was a table and a chair. And the tea would come in, and it'd be on a tray, there'd be a pot, and all the stuff was there, and a fly screen over it, like that. And then you had to wait, and then there would be a tea, and you'd drink tea. I said, is this a Zulu ritual? And they said, Smoten, it's modern. Smoten, yeah. So they were experimenters. These Amakatla experimented with so many different kinds of cultural mixes. In my show I talk about, the quintessential picture is a man wearing a three-piece suit and car tire sandals, and joining the Christian church and stealing all of the hymns and doing war dances to them, upsetting the Christians, and bringing in different kinds of foods into the Zulu traditional cuisine. These are the great cultural experimenters. So my crossing over was actually preempted by a pre-existing tradition of cultural mixing. And I think it's in human nature that if you want to, really make somebody do something, say you can't do it. So they wanted to know, well, what is, the people in power, they drink tea. Let's try some tea drinking. Okay, let's watch what they do. Okay, and then they say, this is easy. And so it becomes a kind of a parody of the power relations in the society, and a funny reflective moment. And that's why I like Norman Catherine's art, because that hand that turns into the dog that's eating the guys, it's that kind of dark humor. It's a self-deprecating humor, and also, but also saying, "Dude, I can drink tea too." Okay, you know. So that's about it for me. Any other questions? Sure, I'm happy to do that. Zulu war songs are, you know, they are very, very well developed, very well defined, and I developed a huge catalog of them. I did a DVD called My Favorite Zulu Street Guitar Songs, and a lot of them are war songs because the Zulu, having to deal with war all the time, it was a pretty topical subject. This one says, "Wonke la madoda alele kwelakithi, kwaZulu. All of our young warriors are asleep in Zululand. Ziphi izinsizwa, where are the warriors?" And the answer is another group who are descending to attack them, saying, "Othina sehla, we are coming down on you." And you can see by the dust that we leave that we are of a great number. There are many of us, and you are sleeping. It's a song admonishing, again, falling asleep. Be awake. And then there's a plain call from the sleeping villagers saying, we can see that our children will never sleep. And I must beg for mercy, for my child is still very young. Please do not harm it. So in this song, you have the whole gamut of the attacker, the attackee, why they attack, how they can attack, because people are sleeping, they shouldn't be sleeping. There's the cry of the mother for the child. It's all in the one war song. Oh yes, the section says there's even a deeper insult because as I'm playing it, I mean there's other lyrics. It says, you can see by our number that you can see by the dust that follows us by our number that we are many, and we are not even Shaka, and we are not even Dingane, who are the great Zulu warrior kings. So we just kind of mediocre warriors, and you guys are already in trouble, so wake up. Wonke la madoda alele kwelakithi sebenzi, alele kwelakithi sebenziswa. Othina sehle ngothuleli wethu, sawanquma amaviyo, singeshaya, singedingane. Oh, let me get up. It's too low for me. Sorry. Where is there one? Yep, here we go. Let me put this up here. Key change. Hello. Okay. This is my pocket. bakithi sebenziswa sebenziswa othina sehle ngothulilwe tu sawanquma amaviyo singeshaka singedingane sebenziswa sebenziswa othina sehle ngothulilwe tu sawanquma amaviyo singeshaka singedingane angibonile izingane zizolala kanjani vele yami semncane ningayishaya amadoda. That's the mother. Angibonile izingane zizolala kanjani vele yami semncane ningayishaya amadoda. Sebenziswa sebenziswa othina sehle ngothulilwe tu sawanquma amaviyo singeshaka singedingane. Cheers. Cheers. Thanks.